Hey there! Welcome back to Color and Craft Haven, a little corner of calm where we can slow down, breathe, and add a little color to the day. Today I wanted to talk about something that I think a lot of creative people experience, even if they don't always put it into words. And that's the difference between crafting for mindfulness and crafting for skill. Because even though those two things can overlap sometimes, they actually create very different experiences emotionally, mentally, and even physically. A lot of us get into creative hobbies because we're looking for comfort. We want something relaxing to do after a stressful day. We want to feel grounded. We want a hobby that feels gentle instead of demanding. Maybe we start coloring because it looks calming. Maybe we start knitting because repetitive movement feels soothing. Maybe we pick up clay, journaling, miniature painting, scrapbooking, diamond art, or card making because we want a break from constant pressure. But then something interesting starts to happen over time. At first, we're just doing the hobby for the experience itself. The process is the reward. But eventually, sometimes even without realizing it, we begin to shift into a different mindset. We start thinking about improvement. We compare our work to others. We notice techniques we don't have yet. We start caring about precision. We want cleaner blends and straighter lines and smoother shading and more polished finished projects. And neither of those approaches is wrong. That's the important thing I really want to emphasize today. Crafting for mindfulness is valid. Crafting for skill is valid. Wanting relaxation is valid. And wanting growth is just as valid. The problem usually only starts when we accidentally expect one approach to behave fully like the other. Because crafting for mindfulness and crafting for skill often feel very different emotionally. When you craft for mindfulness, the goal is usually the experience itself. You're focusing on being present. You're focusing on slowing down. You're focusing on sensory comfort, repetitive motion, color, texture, rhythm, atmosphere. The finished project may matter a little, but it usually isn't the main point. You might color simply because the motion of the pencil across the paper feels calming. You might crochet because counting stitches helps quiet your brain. You might build miniature houses because arranging tiny objects feels peaceful and immersive. You may not even care if the finished project is technically impressive. The process itself already fulfilled its purpose. And honestly, I think this kind of creativity is incredibly important right now. We live in a world where almost everything becomes performance-based eventually. Productivity gets attached to everything. Metrics get attached to everything. Followers, views, engagement, monetization, perfection, optimization. All of it slowly creeps into spaces that once felt personal and restorative. So there's something deeply healthy about protecting a hobby that exists simply because it makes you feel calmer. Not better, not faster, not more successful, just calmer. And that matters. And sometimes people feel almost guilty for talking about it like that. Like, if they aren't already improving rapidly, then somehow they're just wasting their time. But relaxation is not wasted time. Emotional regulation is not wasted time. Rest is not wasted time. If coloring quietly for an hour helps your nervous system settle after a difficult day, then that hobby is already doing something valuable. Now, on the other side of things, crafting for skill has its own kind of satisfaction too. Because there's also something genuinely rewarding about growth. Humans naturally enjoy mastery. We enjoy learning. We enjoy seeing progress over time. It feels good when techniques that once seemed impossible slowly become manageable. Maybe your shading improves. Maybe your hand becomes steadier. Maybe your understanding of color theory deepens. Maybe your clay work becomes smoother. Maybe your sewing lines become cleaner. Maybe your painting becomes more intentional. There's a very real joy in developing ability. And honestly, skill-focused crafting can also become deeply mindful in its own way. I think people sometimes frame mindfulness and improvement as opposites, but they're not necessarily. Concentration itself can become meditative. Focusing fully on detail can create a flow state where the outside world quiets down for a little while. If you've ever become completely absorbed in blending colored pencil layers, or carefully painting tiny details, or sculpting something intricate, you probably know exactly what I mean. Hours disappear. Your brain narrows its focus. Everyday stress temporarily fades into the background. That's still mindfulness. It's just arriving through concentration instead of relaxation. But the emotional tone is often different. Mindfulness-focused crafting tends to feel slower, softer, and more forgiving. Skill-focused crafting often introduces tension alongside satisfaction. You become more aware of mistakes. You notice weaknesses more quickly. You develop standards for yourself. And again, that isn't bad. Frustration is actually part of learning about almost every creative skill. The uncomfortable stage where your taste exceeds your ability is incredibly normal. In fact, most artists spend years cycling through phases where they improve enough to suddenly recognize new flaws they couldn't see before. That can be discouraging if you aren't expecting it, especially because social media tends to compress everybody's creative journey into polished snapshots. You see the finished watercolor painting, not the 15 failed attempts underneath it. You see the final crocheted blanket, not the tangled yarn in the corner. You see beautifully blended coloring pages, not the pages where somebody pressed too hard to pour the paper 3 years ago while still learning. And I think this is where people sometimes accidentally lose the cozy part of creativity. Not because skill development is bad, but because comparison quietly takes over the emotional center of the hobby. Suddenly, crafting stops being, I enjoy doing this, and becomes, am I good enough at this? That shift changes everything. Because once your creativity becomes tied entirely to performance, your nervous system starts reacting differently. Mistakes feel heavier. Experimentation becomes scarier. Finishing projects becomes emotionally loaded. You may even avoid creating altogether because you don't want to confront imperfection. Ironically, that pressure often slows your improvement. Fear makes people rigid creatively, and rigid creativity usually struggles to grow. One thing I've noticed over the years is that many people actually move back and forth between these two approaches depending on what's happening in their lives. Sometimes you want challenge. Sometimes you need comfort. Sometimes you feel energized and curious and motivated to learn new techniques. Sometimes you're emotionally exhausted and just need repetitive motion and soft colors while listening to relaxing music. And honestly, I think recognizing what you need in a particular season matters a lot. There are times when pushing yourself creatively feels exciting and healthy. And there are times when turning your hobby into a self-improvement project honestly just adds more stress to an already overloaded brain. I also think different hobbies actually lean toward different balances of mindfulness and skill. Adult coloring, for example, often begins very mindfulness-oriented for many people. The barrier to entry is low. You can start immediately. The structure already exists on the page. There's comfort in simply filling spaces with color. But over time, many colorists become fascinated by technique. They learn blending methods, lighting effects, texture creation, color palettes, marker combinations, paper quality differences, and advanced shading approaches. Neither version of the hobby is more legitimate than the other. A beginner quietly coloring with budget pencils after work is not less valid than somebody producing highly technical, gallery-worthy pages. They're simply engaging with creativity differently. The same thing happens with knitting. Some people knit primarily because repetitive stitching calms anxiety. Other people become deeply invested in garment construction, stitch complexity, fiber science, and advanced pattern drafting. Some people bake because the ritual feels grounding. Some people bake because mastering techniques excites them. Some people paint miniatures to relax. Others paint miniatures competitively. And honestly, many people do both at different times. I think one of the healthiest things we can do creatively is to stop forcing ourselves to justify why we enjoy something. You don't need to monetize every hobby. You don't need to master every hobby. You don't need to become exceptional at something for it to enrich your life. There's this strange pressure online sometimes where hobbies almost become identity tests. If you aren't consistently improving, buying professional supplies, studying techniques, or producing highly polished work, people sometimes act like you aren't serious enough. But joy does not require professional level output. You're allowed to simply enjoy things. And at the same time, if you genuinely love studying technique and growing creatively, that's wonderful too. Wanting mastery doesn't make you shallow or overly perfectionist. Skill development can be deeply fulfilling. It can build confidence. It can create pride and accomplishment. It can strengthen focus and patience. The important thing is understanding which emotional need your creativity is serving in a particular moment. Are you crafting to decompress? Are you crafting to express yourself? Are you crafting to improve? Are you crafting to challenge yourself? Are you crafting to feel grounded? Are you crafting to feel accomplished? Those answers can change from day to day. And honestly, I think problems often happen when we accidentally mismatch our expectations. If you sit down needing emotional comfort, but immediately pressure yourself to perform at a highly technical level, your hobby may stop feeling restorative. But if you deeply want growth and challenge, yet never allow yourself to leave your comfort zone, you may eventually feel creatively stagnant. Balance matters. Something I personally find helpful is intentionally separating comfort crafting from practice crafting. Sometimes I specifically choose projects that are easy, familiar, repetitive, and emotionally soothing. I already know I'm not trying to improve dramatically during that session. I'm there for the atmosphere, the calmness, the ritual. Other times, I intentionally choose challenge projects. Maybe I'm experimenting with difficult color combinations. Maybe I'm practicing blending techniques that frustrate me just a little. Maybe I'm trying a medium that feels unfamiliar. But mentally separating those experiences helps me avoid disappointment. If I expect a stressful learning session to feel as soothing as casual coloring, I'll probably feel frustrated. And if I expect simple comfort crafting to rapidly improve my technical skill, I'm also going to be frustrated. Understanding the purpose of the session changes the emotional experience. I also think mindfulness crafting deserves more respect culturally than it sometimes gets. There's a tendency to undervalue activities associating with softness, comfort, quietness, or emotional care. But calming activities genuinely affect people psychologically. Repetitive creative motion can reduce stress responses. Focused tactile activities can help regulate attention and anxiety. Quiet hobbies can create structure and emotional grounding. That isn't doing nothing. That's nervous system care. And honestly, many homebound people, many chronically stressed people or disabled people, caregivers, grieving people, and overwhelmed people rely on cozy creativity for emotional survival more than outsiders might realize. A coloring page may look simple from the outside, but sometimes that coloring page is the reason somebody got through a difficult evening. That matters. At the same time, creative skill development can also become incredibly empowering. Learning difficult techniques reminds us that growth is possible. Watching ourselves improve over time builds confidence, not only in art, but in life generally. There's something deeply satisfying about realizing I couldn't do this 6 months ago. That feeling is powerful too. So honestly, I don't think the answer is choosing one approach permanently over the other. I think the healthier goal is understanding the difference between them, respecting both, and allowing yourself to move between them without guilt. Some days your creativity will be a blanket. Some days it will be a staircase. Both are valuable. And maybe one of the nicest things about cozy creativity is that it gives us room for both. We can seek softness when we need softness. We can seek challenge when we crave challenge. We can color casually one day and study technique intensely the next. Creativity doesn't have to become a rigid identity. It can simply be a companion that changes with us as life changes. That's it for today's colorful time. I'd love to hear whether you personally lean more toward mindfulness crafting or skill focused crafting right now, or if you move between both depending on your mood. Let me know in the comments. Take care, stay creative, and I'll see you in the next one.